Um, so welcome back to another installment of Diversity Now. I feel like Wednesday has turned into webinar day because I was with Dr. Watson on um, looking at their webinar that they had earlier today at 12. And then we have ours. And then later this month, Cal State East Bay will have their webinar series again on a Wednesday. So it's like, I don't know if every university in the Bay Area was just like, Wednesday is going to be the day we do our webinars, but it's turning out that way. All right, let me read the first people statement before we get started, and then we'll jump right into things. Toro University, California sits on the traditional unceded lands of the Karkin people, one of the 8 Ohlone tribes in the Bay Area. That was part of the unratified treaties of 1851 and 1852. Solano County is also the historic home to various tribes of the Potwin and Miwok people. All right, so today we are so lucky to have Dr. Paige Hersey with us again. But we also have Marissa Gutierrez. Is it Vicario? Did I get it right? Okay. And they are bringing a wonderful conversation around human rights to us today. And so, as you can see, we have a strong theme that has been going on this semester, where we have taken the diversity now, and I think we have gotten real edgy with it. And I like this edginess that we're bringing to it. So today is going to be another great conversation. With that being said, Paige, would you mind introducing your colleague? And I know you all have an opening that you have planned out, but I figure you know her better than I do, so you would be the best person to introduce her.
I am happy to do that, and I'm glad to be here. So I'm Paige Hersey, for anyone I have not yet met. I'm chair of our multiple and single subject programs in the Graduate School of Education. And I also have, I kind of think of it as like a connected but kind of secret life as a human rights educator. And Marissa and I are allies in that work. We met through an organization called Human Rights Educators USA, and it's a national network bringing human rights education into schools and communities and really trying to work with individuals and organizations to make human rights more a part of curriculum and community education. So Marissa is the executive director of ARTE, and she's going to tell you more about that organization and what they do based in Brooklyn, New York. Marissa is, how do I even describe you? I don't know. Dynamic and creative, and she makes piñatas, very creative piñatas. Marissa, I know you're going to tell us more about ARTE and about yourself a little bit, but I'm just so grateful to know you, and that our work together on human rights education has also kind of merged into a friendship, and me learning more about ARTE and the work that your team is doing. So I'm excited to hear more and share more with our attendees and panelists.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you both. Thank you all so much for having me and inviting me as part of your community, your webinar Wednesdays, if you will, like you're having. It's good to be here and good to, just to connect and to talk about these things that I have the honor of working with and doing on the grassroots level and just here. If Paige, do you mind sharing the screen when you get a chance? And thank you. But yeah, as Paige mentioned, my name is Marissa Gutierrez Vicario, and my soul is based in Brooklyn. We'll leave it at that. So we'll leave it. But a lot of, I identify as a human rights educator. Again, sometimes artist, trying to be a piñata artist, and activist, and so I also teach as well, and I teach at City College, and a different, also another hat that I wear. But the thing I'm really excited to share with you today, though, is talking about ARTE and talking about my work. I'm going to jump in a little bit, but art and resistance through education, ARTE. And all of the things that we do, there's three kind of pillars that I'll talk a little bit about, and we'll talk a little in the Q&A. We're at the intersection of human rights education, at ARTE, so also art and specifically visual art, and then also youth development. So on the next slide, you'll see, I love starting with this slide, the next one, because it is, for folks that don't know or do know, it's actually a sculpture by Carl Frederick Rudersward called Nonviolence at the United Nations. So it's one of the first things, if you go to the United Nations and check in, you see this. And this is, you see, it's actually, it looks much bigger than it actually is, but it's a sculpture you see. And I love it because it's such a simple message, like what it's trying to convey, and like the gun being tied into a knot, and like the idea of stopping violence, putting an end to violence. So I love to show that with students that we work with, because it's a very simple message, but at the end of the day, how do we create messages and use messages to with human rights and messages of human rights through art and through imagery and through creation and through imagination, all these other things. So that this is one reason I like to often start with this, is the idea that very simple ideas can have great messages and great impact in the world. So next, I just, again, want to jump in a little background on what we do. So again, we engage young people to amplify their voices for human rights change through the visual arts. And I always say we engage to amplify voices, and we don't give young people voices. And Paige knows I'm really big on that, because young people we work with have voices. Young people have voices, ideas, are already leaders. So the idea is that we're using an arts-based curriculum and fused with this human rights education to help support the voices and help them create the communities that they want to live in, right? So that's kind of the core of what we do. We started, on next slide, you'll see, and I'll talk also a little bit about what ARTE has been doing, and then how it's kind of changed over the pandemic, of course. So at the core of everything we do, for folks to know, we work with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we work with this document. So here you'll see this really important document for human rights, created in 1948, coming out of World War II, developed by Eleanor Roosevelt and her colleagues, and at the United Nations. So I share this with you because everything we do is focused on that. But truly, a lot of young people don't know about the UDHR, and a lot of adults don't know about the UDHR, especially U.S. Americans. So our ideas. One thing we did is we worked with an agency called Thought Matter. We partnered with them to redesign it. We didn't create the UDHR, so we redesigned the UDHR. So the idea that young people could have access to this document, and the idea is that also, we printed out 4,000 copies. We printed out a lot of copies. We want folks to have them, but at the end of the day, it's about how do we train young people? How do they know that those are their rights, and then that they have those rights and they should fight for their rights? So that's a lot of the work that we do, whether it's making a mural or whether it's doing a zine or whether it's doing a digital training. That's the core of what we do. On the next slide, you'll see a little bit about what we do, like why we use the visual arts. And we'll talk a little bit about Paige and I. We'll talk about this in a second. So we use the visual arts as a part of our human rights education curriculum for three really more, but these are kind of the core ones. The idea of education discovery, so to teach that human rights in a safe, personalized, and exploratory context. We also look at creation, so for students to express themselves, their lives, and the human rights violations they may feel passionate about, or they might also have experienced. Like I always say, I don't want to make assumptions about what young people are coming through or going through, but they may have experienced those violations. And one thing to note, we'll talk a little bit about, we also worked, prior to the pandemic, we worked in jails, and we still have connections and provide resources for young people in jails. So, knowing that, we also know that young people in the system of mass incarceration are experiencing violations, and what does that mean, and how, until they are free, what does that mean for us as educators to support them on their journeys. And then lastly, presentation. So to advocate for human rights change through in one's community and across the globe, and the idea that it starts in the backyard. But we're also making connection to these larger human rights issues that exist across the globe. So the next two slides, I'll go through quickly because all of the slides are murals, and they have their individual stories and different communities. This particular one I really love it was Global Women Heroes, which we call it. So it was actually a collaboration between young people who worked in jail or lived in jail, had to be in jail, and the idea of young people outside of jail. So they both had separate curriculums, and they learned about the same curriculum, which is focused on global women activists. But separately, this came together to produce this mural in honor of the work that was done by students in jail. So we're really proud about it. It was an idea of focusing on gender justice and focusing on human rights activism, and also bringing attention to mass incarceration and what young people experience. So that's actually located in West Harlem. The next slide you'll see was done actually by a more multi-generational group of folks, but focusing on the right to housing, human rights. And I love this mural so much because it was in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And for folks that are from New York or from familiar with New York, Williamsburg, like South Brooklyn, is hipster, hipster gentrified, I'll say this: it is and it isn't, right? It's because there's a very vibrant community that has been there for decades and generations, fighting for their rights to be there and to continue to live there. And also kind of what does it mean to have folks who are coming into the community and gentrifying it? So this was really powerful because it was a reminder that this art and creation is very hard. Sometimes these were folks who were trying to convey decades of their life in a mural, and how do we share the story of our neighborhoods and our narratives in a mural? So it was a lot of work. It was really hard, but they came together, and it was something that I think that they're really proud of, and I think that they would love to know that folks outside of their community know about them, and so I'm really proud of them and the work that we did together. The last slide I want to share with the murals is this one that was done in Queens working with immigrant youth from. At the time, they were a recently immigrated youth from Latin America, Central and Latin America. And so they created this mural that was focusing on LGBTQ rights and also the rights of immigrants. So, within the mural, you'll see pictures of themselves, of people they admire, people that died also. Like this is a while back. So this is during the Pulse Orlando massacre. So they felt a connection knowing that particular community of folks were Latinx. So like that was something that they felt really connected to. So without the weight of discrimination, we can fly. So I'm going to pause here for a second because I have a quick activity, but I know this is also a webinar. So so feel free if the panelists want to participate. But one other thing I want to share is the idea of artivism. So in everything that we do, we also, along with human rights and UDHR, we talk about artivism. So we didn't come up with this, of course. This is something that's been part of human rights work for forever. But for us, literally the intersection of art and activism. And then one definition we love to use from our friends at Artism galleries is the combination of art and activism, which uses creative expression to spread awareness of social justice issues. So artivists challenge social and cultural norms by bringing personal and often private issues to light that sparks a dialogue for conversation. Through the pen, paintbrush, graffiti, spoken word, theater, sculpture, and other art mediums that aren't even listed here, but you can think of, artists intervene upon public spaces to make a political statement. So that's one definition of artivism. It's one that we have adopted from Artism galleries, but it's something that we really look to as we try to explain to young people, like, how do we infuse art into our activism and vice versa. So the next slide, and I would love if you all could, if you want to help contribute. When we talk about murals and artwork, we often start with a single image, like I started with the gun and the nonviolent sculpture, because that's one way of trying to create an image or create kind of an awareness around a particular issue. So here you'll see some examples of human rights iconography and imagery here. You'll see different images that we pulled from either work that we've done or also movements that you've seen. So I'd love for folks, if you can take a quick look and see what you see, any images that you notice. And on the next slide, and we'll go back to it in a second, I'd love for you to share, in the chat box, choose an image that strikes, is striking to you or that stands out to you. And then what human rights or human rights movement do you associate with that image? So yeah, we can go, I can put it in the chat, or we can put it in the chat, but also I'd love if we could go back to that image, and I'd love if anyone had any responses to share. And to model this with you, I think I see the fist, the Black Power fist, and I think a lot of the movement associated with the civil rights movement, but also the uprising for racial justice and the Black Lives Matter movement, and how that is a symbol that has become a part of the movement. Yeah, I'm seeing Paige said the ribbon reminds of HIV/AIDS awareness. Yeah, definitely. And colors also matter too, right? Because we think about the red ribbon that signifies that particular movement. If there's anything else, and this is also something you can sit and think with, right? And think about how these images have become also iconic in ways and helping bring awareness and to these issues. And also thinking about, I've never thought about this before, but as I'm talking with you all, also how hard activists fought for those images to become imprinted into our minds and imprinted into the psyche of the society. I think that's also something to think about. That's because of folks who have fought for those kind of rights and images and everything included in that. But yeah, I think people can feel free to think about this or add as we go along or chat. But otherwise, I'd love to pass it over to my colleague Paige, and we can have a little chat. And also, I saw Freddie Castro said, the scale of justice image reminds me of the ongoing battle for civil rights, equality, and social justice for African Americans. And the fist and the scales of justice. Yes. Yes, definitely. And that's something I often don't see that, but the fist is also incorporated in that. Thank you for saying that. But yeah, so there's so many different, then there's more images than that. And then Lisa Norton says, the gender image is super powerful to me, rethinking how we can envision and expand gender. Most definitely. Thank you for your contributions.
Paige, you're
Sorry,
on.
Everybody, it has to happen once in every Zoom meeting or webinar. So I got it out of the way for all of us. I just put the slide up that has Marissa's contact, ARTE's contact info for Instagram, Facebook, or their email address. Feel free to grab those. I have to say, Marissa knows I'm an Instagram lurker. I don't post, but I do like to check things out. And one of the things that Marissa's team at ARTE has been doing lately, well, there are a couple different things that I really like. The 3-minute actions are great. I sent a message to the Biden administration yesterday about detention for youth. And also, I really like the Artivist Spotlight that they've been doing. So they've been spotlighting different artists of color, a couple that I had heard of and a couple that I hadn't. So if you're on Instagram and you like to follow inspirational accounts, I would say the ARTE account is doing really great work. So check it out. All right, Marissa, are you ready for me to end screen sharing and we can just have a conversation?
That'll be wonderful. Thank you.
So one question I have, which I don't already know the answer to, was just how did ARTE come to be?
So thank you. Oof. So it's not a hard question, but it's like one of those because you could argue it started when I was in high school, but you could argue the official kind of thing that response I guess to say is that I used to work. I studied in New York, and then I started working for some smaller grassroots organizations, Advocacy Lab and other organizations that have come and gone but have had a profound impact on people's lives. And I remember working there, and I really loved the human rights education component, but I also felt young people, there was still a disconnect, I think, in terms of these are my rights, but are they? And I've never heard of this before. So I feel while I was there, I started to think, and also personally, again, loving the arts and being an artist, seeing how art was a way to connect these ideas of these are my rights. As I remember there was a young person who was just kind of I remember at the time we're talking about Cambodia a lot, and he's just Cambodia, I get it. I get there's some that particular issue there. I think we're talking about human trafficking. I get it. He's but I also see a lot of issues in my own backyard. So it was interesting. I'll never forget that. So, I started to think, what are ways that we can creatively get young people or support young people to talk about these issues that are happening in their own backyard in a way that feels personal and a way that they can create. There was just I wanted to see more creation in terms of, and because I always think about it, you see movies or you see a piece of poetry or Instagram post or something like that. And I feel like that kind of resonates you. The art resonates you with in a way that like nothing else can, I think. So that kind of was where the first beginnings of that, in terms of we can create like a dynamic human rights organization that infuses these different elements that makes like law and like treaties and like documents like come alive, you know?
Thank you for that. Do you want to just give everyone a quick definition of human rights education? I guess this is where I could do it. I mean, I guess it's a little test for both of us, right? What's our elevator speech for what is human rights education?
And I would ask,
I'm sorry.
Can you all also define for us human rights, so we have both of those?
Oh, like I love it. I'll try to take human rights, but it's funny because we always teach about it like with students, and like I think of it as the rights that we have. They're inherent to all of us, regardless of gender, race, sexuality, nationality. And I often tell young people that these rights are, you know, that you can't like separate like rights, like they're all a part of right. Like you need the right to vote and you need the right to eat. Like you can't, they're like indivisible. And I often, in answering your definition, I have had students ask like, when we ask like, what is the thing that you need to be in order to have human rights? And like, sometimes they'll ask, you have to be a citizen, you know what I mean? So I often tell students like, you don't have to be a citizen. All you do is have to be born. It's like something that no one has given you, you're just born with. So that's kind of the definition I use with students and thinking about how we like recognize and internalize human rights, but they're just these rights that like you have. So and then we get into like CEDAW, and then we get into economic, political, social rights and all that fun stuff. But like, so there, yeah. Do you want me to try? Oh, did I miss anything? Is there anything like I missed that was really, really important?
No, I think that was a great start. I mean, and I would add, you know, that not only are you born with the rights and you have them just by being human, but no one can take them away. So whether you cross a border or you are working in a certain job or industry, or, you know, that they are really inherent to you at, you know, just by being human.
I had a group of 8th graders ask me if aliens had rights the other day, and I was like, technically I don't think they'd be considered human if they're from outer space, so I don't think that counts. Like, but like maybe there's a universal declaration of alien rights. I don't know, like, but it was a good question because I was like, okay. But yeah, thank you for saying that. Mention that no one can take them away from you, because I think oftentimes, just to add to that, when we work with incarcerated young folks, it feels very much like those rights are taken away, and trying to have them understand that they still have those rights no matter what, even though it feels like, I can't imagine what it feels like to have them taken away in those ways. And like, so yeah.
And so I think, you know, one thing to think about is here in the United States, which I think most of our attendees are here in the US, we don't necessarily learn about human rights in K-12 education. In our, maybe, you know, some folks might have more experience with human rights based on where they went to school or what kinds of courses they took, like in undergrad. I know for me, it wasn't really until my doctoral program that I started to learn more about human rights. I mean, I knew a little bit and I had some experience, but I feel like part of what has motivated me to get and stay involved with human rights education is just, I really feel like it gives us a language and a vocabulary to talk about what justice and what we all should be, what should be inherent. And, you know, I think here in the US, definitely it can be complicated. But, you know, every semester that I teach my social studies methods course, I do a little poll of my students, that they fill out a little survey about their experiences and learning about human rights up until that point. And it is really across the board, you know, like it's varied. It's really, you know, depends. But I would say overall, not much experience with human rights and learning the human rights documents. And so I really feel like it's valuable and important. And I think the work that you're doing with ARTE and your team is doing is so important. And yeah, we got to keep pushing.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add too, as you're mentioning about human rights education, what it is, because it is in terms of like teaching folks and communities like what their human rights are and like building out human rights culture. But I also think I actually had a visit to Dr. Fernicke's class yesterday, and he brought up this point of and in human rights education class, kind of like also like human rights education is also a way of helping like create a more democratic, like compassionate kind of environments for students to exist in. And I sometimes forget how that needs to be explicit, because he brought up the point, he's like, if you're not using human rights education in your classroom and trying to actually create, not only learning about what it looks like in the world, but also within the classroom itself, it kind of like, it contradicts everything. You know what I mean? Like you're like talking about all these beautiful rights, but if you have a classroom that's not democratic and students feel unsafe, or it's not of one compassion. So I think it's also like we talk about human rights, like, you know, like building like human rights education of and through, and like what that means in the classroom, in the smaller community, in the larger community, and fighting for and with human rights like as a framework. So yeah, I know that is always like hanging in terms of how we create spaces for young people, but at the same time, it's something I think that can easily get lost, you know, in terms of like, oh, you know, well, yeah, it's great, you know, like the classroom is great, but like at the end of the day, is it really democratic? Is it equal that we're trying to build within the classroom? So I don't know. I just remember that from that conversation, which was really great.
Yeah, to me, that's the part of the education through human rights, right? So we can teach about human rights. We can teach students the documents. We can teach them about the UN. But really, if the education through human rights, if we're not upholding students, young people's rights in the classroom, in how we work with them, then what is all that learning? Like, we're learning about rights, but if the rights aren't being upheld in the learning process in the classroom, and then the education for human rights piece, I think comes in with, you know, what you've been talking about, activism, artivism, finding ways where students can take that knowledge and use it to create change. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about that I was so was so inspiring at your fundraiser a few weeks ago was this idea of your youth board. Will you tell us a little bit more about how ARTE is getting youth really involved? And it doesn't seem like it's a surface involvement. It seems like they are really like integral to what ARTE does. So I would love to hear more about that.
And also I want to make sure we're addressing a question coming up. But I was gonna say thank you for saying that, because to be transparent, like it was something that we didn't, I don't know if we couldn't, but we didn't do for a long time. We didn't have a junior board. We didn't do this. So this, I think, with one of the, I don't want to say good things, but like one of the ways that we've been trying to continue our work in the pandemic is being able to create, instead of while we're not focusing on murals and I can't wait until the day that we can continue that work again, but we've been trying to think more about youth training and like true, like and like you said, Paige, like involvement that isn't just surface. So so one of those things again is the youth, junior board. We said with junior board and senior board. So the idea that we're starting small, but with a group of young folks who have had some connection with ARTE, and the idea is like, and we're working through that right now. Like they're keeping me accountable in like 1,000 different ways in terms of like, you know, what is the mission that we're trying to achieve? What does it mean? You know, what does it mean to have youth take the lead and like and lead workshops and lead and also to feel like it is their organization, you know, as opposed, like I think that's like been something that's really big, and like so they've stepped up and they're really, really excited about that. And I think and just like, you know, in terms of like this is why we think art is important, you know what I mean? And I think you heard their words, like, you know, this is why we think art transforms lives. So I think creating those spaces and we'll see that where that develops. And then, but like I'm glad you said it, like really thinking of ways that like, okay, it's not just surface level. It's not like in the nonprofit world where it's like, we're giving you a service. You know what I mean? Like, we're trying to really, really like, as much as the grants, I mean, that's a whole different discussion, but as much as grants and things like that want to like, how many young people have you served? We're trying to think about what are the spaces that young people themselves serve their communities and serve the organization in the ways that they want to. So my hope is that we're through this kind of work, and it's hard. It takes like, even in terms of social media, we're looking at like how, like, if you want genuine social media interaction and actually want young people to be a part of that, like it takes time and it takes learning and it takes like asking and emailing and contacting, because young people have a lot of things on their plate, and then just like to assume that they'll just be able to, oh yeah, definitely, like, you know what I mean? I think that they're modeling also the things that we want young people to step up, and also doing that to model that and show that we're also as adults trying to do that work. So yeah, no, thank you for mentioning that. And I can talk a little bit later about the training program, but yeah.
I think you can jump into the training program if you want. That's really interesting.
Trying to give like a
little teaser. We can circle back to it if you want.
No, and one thing that we've been doing since we're not able to meet in person is like, we started this thing called Youth Voices Lead. So we had this, it was our first kind of usually we partner with schools and like specific like organizations, but this time around we wanted to have it like, it's ARTE's kind of training program. So we have a group of young people who are committed, like they're doing a 10-week digital program that is focusing on racial justice. So they're learning about, you know, the right to housing through the racial justice lens, the right to education, healthcare, and kind of these different issues through this racial justice lens. And the idea is that by the end of it, they'll be leading their own workshops and activities for and folks who are invited, you're all invited to come. So we're trying, like, we've done it before a few times, but oftentimes when we create a piece of artwork, young people are like, okay, well, what's next? So this is kind of one way to like, this is what's next. Your leadership is what's next. So it's very special. It's very, you know, and this is our first time doing something like this. So we'll see how it turns out, and like, you know, and what we need to learn to make it better for next time. But I saw like there was a huge desire for young people to step up and participate, and for their labor to be honored, and to create something, and also just meet young folks who, because, you know, even though there's a lot of, in the virtual world, it still can feel disconnected, you know, so trying to create intentional space. So that's something I'm really excited about, and all with human rights education, and all thinking about, you know, this intersection of art and human rights.
I mean, I think it has been really interesting in this past year plus, going on more, just how art can kind of keep us going in a way. I don't know. It's hard to put into words, but I think music or seeing images, you actually introduced me to, I mean, I think I knew of her, Bisa Butler. I knew of her from the Obama portrait, but I've been following her now a little bit, and she has a big opening that just happened in Chicago, and I just feel like there's something that really we need right now that art can feed, and because we are so isolated, and it just feels like a way to open up that creative part of ourselves, feed a part of ourselves that isn't necessarily involved in our day-to-day life of, you know, all the things that we're doing right now to keep going. Ijeoma, I saw your question or your thoughts in the chat.
Yeah, and you all have a vibe going on right now. So as you can see, I have exited out of the picture. But no, statement, that statement on artivism, and the idea that artivism is it is publicly making a political statement with your art. And I was just thinking about the murals. Like, I don't know of many murals that don't make political statements, and they are obviously public. Um, but I do know that artists sometimes are not intending to make a political statement. They're simply intending to create art, right? And but when you do it in such a public fashion, it almost inevitably is going to create that political bound. And so I'm just wondering how you help youth, how you help them amplify their voice when maybe they're not trying to have it amplified, like they're just trying to be artists, but just the nature of their art and what they're doing their art around is going to be political, is going to amplify. Like, how do you help them kind of be prepared for that aspect of it? Did that make sense, that question?
I think it did, but also if I'm not responding properly, let me know. I trust her, let me know. But I think a lot also about young folks, especially young folks of color, and I think a lot about and Black, Indigenous people of color. And I feel like at this moment of time, maybe it's always been this way. I feel like when they create, they do have to think about the different dimensions of their work and the different kind of lenses, and how when they create something, society sees them in different like lenses, and how that can be overwhelming, I think, a lot. And like how I think also for many young people that I've worked with, like the act of creating art is also political, whether, and I think what you're trying to say is like also whether they want it or not, like I think a lot about so for example, working with students in jail, and like where I think sometimes for some of them the act of creating art can be political, because it's oftentimes, I didn't understand it until I was there, but how it could be seen as like unsafe, or they have to close themselves out, or they have to like making art is seen as for young men, when we're thinking about gender, like I don't agree with these. I'm just saying, like in terms of like it's art is like creating is feminine, and like how that might be dangerous in a very toxic masculine space, like all these kind of things I think about that I hadn't thought about before. So I see, like, I wish that they didn't have to think about that and they could just create, because I think their peers who do not identify as young people of color don't have to necessarily have that same kind of, I don't want to say burden, but that's the best word I can think of, but they don't have that extra kind of, they don't have the luxury to not have to think about those things, So, one thing we talked to them about, especially with the murals, is like, I think you're right, like not all art, we take and we process and we interpret art the way we want it to, right? Like it just like we see something. I'll tell you in a second about a project that we've been working on for a while, but with regards to that, I always tell them too, like it's very important for you to have a clear message of the artwork that you're creating, because someone else will probably put that message on there for you. So you need to be really, really clear. Like this is my intention by creating this piece of artwork. If it is going to be in that public space, like you mentioned, because yeah, we've done murals before where, especially in the public realm, and I think street artists who have done thousands of murals have a better idea of this, but like, when you're in the public realm, it belongs to the public, and everyone has an opinion when you're creating some kind of, like I remember that Global Women Heroes mural that got so many, everyone had an opinion about what it should look like and this and that. And it was powerful because the young people were able to address those questions and comments, but it was also really exhausting. So I think to sum all of this up, I think that it can be very exhausting, I think, for young folks who have to like create art, but also it's being interpreted in a certain way, and also in the political climate and like all this kind of it's not as simple as I wish that it could be for them. I hope I answered your question or addressed it.
No, you did in so many different ways. The first thing I think about is the work that I used to do with young men in the hall. And it wasn't art, but we used to do spoken word with them. And I remember the censorship that they experienced with feeling like, hey, like in this space, I can't say everything that I want to say, right? Like there are some things that I cannot say in this space. I also remember just the politics of okay, I didn't say anything explicit, right? But what I said is still getting a certain level of attention, whether it be from my peers or whether it be from staff who have read what I read. And now all of a sudden, you know, our program is being seen in a whole different light because you're giving young people an opportunity to express themselves. And if your experience as a 15, 16, 17-year old has been tainted by interactions with law enforcement and incarceration, that's naturally going to be a part of your art, right? And so, you know, that weight, that exhaustion of wanting to express yourself, but feeling like I don't have the freedom or I don't have the capacity to deal with the backlash that comes with that. That really resonated for me as you were talking. And it just makes me think of, if freedom is a basic human right, it makes me think of how we kind of take that away from our youth when they are actually kind of working through their own art and trying to express themselves in the best way that they can.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you for those words. And I think that, like, yeah, that also speaks to me as well. Just because, well, yeah, sorry, and I know there's other comments, but yeah, I think sometimes we want to create spaces for young people, but you know, but you can't go too far. You know, you can't deviate in a way. You can't say something that's too like controversial, or like there's that. And I think also, I don't know why, I hope this is related, but even today, I was also thinking about like young people care about so much, but sometimes given the spaces, it's hard to see that, or it's hard to recognize that in the way that we process, you know, like even working with students digitally has been hard because I know that they're exhausted and like, you know, like their camera, like people have their cameras off sometimes. And like, but it's like, we had a young student, a young person present today on equality. And you know, I always thought that they were shy or like didn't want to talk, but they had a lot to say. And they're just like, and it was interesting. She was just like, you know, I care about racism, I care about gender, and it's not something I've been caring about this for years. And I was like, it really like touched me. I was like, you know, this wasn't, and she's a young Black woman, this isn't a fad for her, this is her life, you know. And she didn't say that. Like a young person that could be like, well, actually, like they're gonna be like, I feel this. And then so that really touched me today, just because, yeah, I don't know, to give that space and like to share with her. And she had a lot to say, and also finding the ways to be able to give feedback in a way that doesn't close them off, you know, and to like, and helps them flourish in their work. So sorry, but yeah, thank you for saying that. It just it brought up a lot of emotions, but I also know there's other questions, so I'm sorry about that.
I really appreciate both of your kind of, yeah, that was really interesting to think about, and I appreciate both of your perspectives. Michael put in the chat that human rights and human rights education are not as prevalent. I think what we've seen, and Marissa, feel free to jump in, is that there are individual teachers and kind of groups of teachers or educators. I won't say just classroom teachers, but educators in the broader sense, community education, arts education. But they're pockets, right? So it's either an individual who has decided that that human rights education is really important to them, and so it is integrated into their teaching, their curriculum. There are some individual schools, I would say, most often they're private schools, not our, you know, public large school districts. So it seems like at this point, and what Human Rights Educators USA, what we're really working to kind of push for is, how do we make this something that is more prevalent, that, you know, that every child has the right to learn about their human rights, right? And that they learn those naturally, maybe even starting in preschool, we start to talk about what are our rights, and that, you know, their understanding and their knowledge builds over time, because it does seem like right now it's pockets here and there rather than we all learn this. And that's different around the world. I mean, there are definitely countries in Europe or, you know, other countries in other parts of the world that have really prioritized human rights education. And it's part of the curriculum. Every student learns about it. Teachers get training on how to teach about human rights. So Marissa, I would love to hear your thoughts.
No, I think you said it best. I think also, I don't want to like, because this is public. I also like, there's been schools I've worked with that have the name human rights in them, and they don't necessarily like, I get to even have that like education, or with art, there's schools that have the words art in them. They don't have art really. And I'm not faulting the schools. This is the way that our money is spent, and our lack of prioritizing this. So no, I would say that yeah, it hurts me when at private schools, the inequity is so deep, in terms of who has access to like really, really quality education. And like I said, I teach also undergrads at City College, and we talk about this all the time. Like, what does it mean to have, well, most focused on art education, but what does it mean to have a quality program when and be an educator when you have very little resources? So yeah, there's the inequity is like just, it's painful, and it's yeah. So, but I would agree with what you said, Paige.
And I think there are multiple levels to work at it. And part of what I, feel really committed to, even though it's really challenging, is to how do we bring human rights education into teacher education? We're going to be working on this, starting with kind of a small group of folks who want to help kind of shape how we bring human rights into how we prepare teachers, and then hopefully offer some ongoing professional development or webinars, or I'm not sure exactly what it will look like, but really, how can we, and I do that, I'm kind of an example. Like, I am one person, I teach in one of my courses. I try to infuse it throughout the courses I teach, but it's definitely in the social studies and the arts course that I teach for our teacher candidates. We talk about human rights, but I think the constraints of the content can be really challenging, because it is not something that, the state of California is telling us we need to include when we prepare teachers. So it really is challenging, and it is kind of, both at the classroom level with K-12 or even pre-K through community education. It does seem like it's kind of, like Michael said, teacher by teacher movement. And then again, at the although I think at the university level, in some universities, there are, especially if a student feels really motivated and that's their interest and their passion and they want to pursue it, you can major in human rights, right? Or you can have a concentration in human rights, but that's after your K-12 education. It's not something that we're providing to everyone, free public education that includes human rights education. So I think working at the teacher education level really can help us create some movement there, but challenges to face.
Definitely so many challenges. And I think what you're saying, Paige, also goes back to something I think someone, Lisa, mentioned, is to tie it in terms of like organizations. Like, yeah, I think a lot of, I grew up and I became, well, I'm really in elementary school, but that's a different story. But in college and stuff, like Amnesty and human rights, like those are kind of organizations, or we built like our own organization. But I think you're right. Like I said, like you said, teacher by teacher, like some people will reach out to me, or they know, because they know about ARTE, and like I try to support them. But yeah, like a lot. Yeah, but like I said, it's hard knowing that we're providing the only arts education or human rights education for an entire school, and we're just a tiny organization. That's really hard, because it's just like there is a need. Someone asked me recently, is there a need? And I was like, yeah, most definitely. People have been asking, but it just but it is, like, again, about funding, resources, challenges, and stuff like that. And also, but you have to think about by state too. Like I told the students I'm working with in New York City, there's a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of resources. And I often think, what would it be like to teach in Florida? Like, what would it be like to teach in Arizona? Like, where it's a very different, like, I think we don't come up with a lot of challenges. Very few administrators, like, they're very, very supportive, but in other cities or other states, I don't think they have that. And that's really scary to me. Like, ARTE, I don't know, could exist in somewhere. Like, it needs to be in Arizona, but I don't know if it actually could be, so.
I know when you came and spoke with the students in my class last summer, they were so enthusiastic, and they were like, oh, we need something like this in Vallejo. And I think, there is so much activism, and there is art And how do we kind of connect that? I mean, I think what Ijeoma maybe was saying too is, the art is already happening. Our young folks they're creating art, and sometimes it's public and sometimes it's not. But yeah, how do we make the connections between an organization like ARTE or, helping make the connection to human rights for folks who are already activists and working on the issues that really matter in their communities, in their lives. So I think, there really is a need for organizations, but I think it's often, especially with the nonprofit world, everyone's working so hard and, resources are thin, right? Especially now, I'm sure. And it can be such a challenge.
Most definitely. Yeah, like my hope is that like our work will be more scalable and able to like share, like, and just to reach more young people and communities. Because I think at the end of the day, at least for my work, I think it's sometimes hard for people to understand, like, well, for human rights and art, like what does this mean? I don't understand what you're talking about. Like, what are you actually trying to do? But I think once people experience it, and I can say that for young people, I feel like they're like, oh, it makes sense. Like, this feels good. It feels good to be able to create or connect with artists and create something that I'm proud of. I think that, and that's part of the human experience, right? Creating things that we're proud of bring us joy, even if at first we're like apprehensive and we're like, no, I'm not an artist, or like, I don't feel this way. But when people create things that they have participated and spent a lot of time and love and labor, like that is like the joy. And so I always think of it, my personal opinion with this, because I know other people feel differently, but like it is about this process, right? It's this process of creating art. It's a process of creating and building a community with others, and it's a process of recognizing human rights. And it's not, and I'd like to think and that's why it's hard with murals, because I think people are like, oh, you're done, you create a mural, yay. Like, yes, that's cool, but also it's the process of like, what are you going to do after you create the mural? And how can we help you understand that human rights engagement is a lifelong process,
Well, and I think the training program that you were talking about really creates an opportunity for that, right? And we need more opportunities like that for how do we take the next step? Where's the next opportunity, and creating spaces where we can be developing kind of this next generation of human rights activists and educators and artists and artivists. So. Any other questions, thoughts?
I was just gonna say, I know I want to be an artivist when I grow up. Like, like that's just such a dope name. I also wanted to say, Marissa, I feel like my heart is in Brooklyn too. I've only been a couple times, but it is one of my favorite spaces on earth. So I love that we were able to make that connection today with what we're talking about. But we are getting close to the end, and so I will ask both of you if you have any final parting words for us as we get ready to close out our webinar for today.
Well, I noticed Michael's, question there in the chat about, the impact of the pandemic and this time that we're all going through. I mean, I do think it has allowed individuals and collectively, we've had a pause, right? Time to think, time to maybe create in different ways than we would have. I think it also has allowed us to connect in different ways, to recognize like, oh, there can be a workshop or a conference or something that you used to have to go if you couldn't afford to buy a plane ticket and the conference registration and all those things, you couldn't attend. And so I think things are we're able to, open things up a little bit more, whether it's offering professional development and human rights education to teachers or the work that your youth are doing in ARTE. It does feel like there are opportunities that have kind of cracked open because we've had to get creative and we've been able to capitalize on these platforms like Zoom.
I agree with that. I don't know if this is exactly maybe what you mean, Michael, but I also feel like if anything, I think the pandemic has shown like just, I mean, how fragile life is, and I think how fragile like experiences with each other and connection is, and then also, you know, and I've been thinking a lot recently, a lot about self-care, and after long, I actually talked to students about this today. Like for the longest time, I hated the idea. I was like, oh, self-care, like what does that mean? Like a horrible attitude. I'm like, oh, I don't have time for this. And I realized like this is so important more than ever. Like just taking care of mental, physical, everything, and I'm learning that finally, you know, because again, you can't tell students, oh yeah, self-care, and then not do it yourself. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like also like I think how the arts tie into that and to that reflection, whether it's reflection, healing, and again, and there's art therapy, and that's a whole different thing, and that's something that we don't do, but it's very important. But just, you know, how the arts have been this way to help people in their journeys towards healing, either before the pandemic and definitely after. And it's going to be a long road. I think the repercussions of 2020 that lasted like a decade or a century, like just gonna, like that art is going to be a part of that path to help us become more human again. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and I would say, just to add a little bit in response, Michael, we appreciate your former high school teacher frame. Thank you for those questions. And really, yeah, like how do we help young folks or educators really see that this is a moment to capitalize on, and how do we kind of channel all of the feelings that have come up and that over this past year plus, and use it to, yeah, create in whatever form that takes.
I will say that I definitely don't think we would have created Black academics if it had not been for the pandemic. That allowed us to actually get into a creative space. And so, you know, my hope is that for a lot of different people, that the silence allowed them to connect back with the creative part of themselves. The thing that I learned, one of the most impactful things that I learned in graduate school was how to ask questions again. Because the first 15 years, 16 years of my education, I was taught how to not ask questions, right? Because when you ask questions that are unwanted, you're typically shut down. You know, you can only ask questions within a certain context at a certain time and in a certain manner. And so, but when you learn how to start asking questions again, you also begin to discover your creativity, because you have to force yourself to begin to ask questions about everything. It's just like that divergent thinking, right? Is a TV, or can it be so much more than a TV, right? But in order for you to discover the other uses of a TV, you have to first begin to ask questions. And so the pandemic, at least for me, it stirred up a lot of questions about a lot of different things that we don't even have time to go through today. But from that kind of started flowing some creative things. All right, so Marissa, Paige, I really appreciate this conversation and opportunity to learn more about ARTE. I definitely want to come visit those murals one of these days. So maybe we can do like a special Toro field trip to visit the ARTE murals and really. Oh, see, don't say that. That no, you gonna make me too happy. But great conversation. These are the conversations that we need during this time, and so. And it really feeds into our webinar for next week, which is Change Makers for the Next 7 Generations. We'll be talking to my boy Christian Franco and a couple of his colleagues with MILPA. They are all formerly incarcerated, formerly impacted individuals who are working with currently impacted individuals to help them really not only escape the system, but to end the generational curse of being involved in the system. So again, we are trying to go hard this semester in terms of our topics and really touching on things that aren't typically talked about in these spaces. So please join us next week. And again, Marissa, Paige, thank you both for your time and just your honesty in today's conversation. Does anyone have anything else to say before we give the benediction?
Thank you, Ijeoma. Thank you, Marissa, so much. And thank you to Michael behind the scenes.
I will say, so I never do webinars from the place that I'm sitting right now. But there was a moment in the webinar that I smiled and I seen my smile in my picture above my head, and it kind of freaked me out. So I don't think I will ever sit here. I don't think I'll ever sit here again for any other webinars.
I love it.
You all have a wonderful day today.
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you.